Before you watch the movie House of Dark Shadows, here's an introduction into the main characters you'll be seeing in the film. The studio had cut certain scenes for time. The scenes in the beginning of the movie that were cut would have established more about who everyone was and their relationships to each other. So here's a quick rundown of the setup. House of Dark Shadows is set in the tiny coastal town of Collinsport, Maine, founded by the wealthy Collins family. The Collins family have made their fortune in the fish business. They have a successful fishing fleet and cannery. They built their lavish estate on a hill above the town of Collinsport. Their Gothic old mansion, Collinwood, is nestled on a cliff that overlooks the Atlantic Ocean, a place where many of a despondent soul had leapt to their death. There are only 4 members of the Collins family: Roger Collins and Elizabeth Collins Stoddard, who were brother and sister. Elizabeth has a daughter in her 20s named Carolyn, and Roger has a teenage son named David. Carolyn, Elizabeth's daughter, also has a fiancé named Todd. Friends of the family who are seen often hanging around the mansion are Dr. Julia Hoffman and Professor T. Elliot Stokes. Elliot Stokes is a history professor at the local university who has an acute knowledge of the occult and the supernatural. Dr. Julia Hoffman is the Collins family physician who owns her own hospital in town. She is temporarily on sabbatical and staying in the mansion, writing a history about the Collins family. Although Roger and Elizabeth are brother and sister, Elizabeth is the oldest. Therefore, she is the head of the family, the mistress and owner of the mansion and the family business. Roger and his son David reside in the mansion, and Roger helps his sister manage the company. Roger and Elizabeth were both married. Elizabeth has a very close relationship with her daughter Carolyn, especially since it's just been the 2 of them, since her husband Paul, Carolyn's father, ran out on them when Carolyn was just a little girl. And Laura, Roger's wife and David's mother, died when David was 9 years old, and Roger's been having a hard time controlling his mischievous son ever since. When David gets in trouble, he hides at the old house, an abandoned mansion on the property that served as the original family mansion before Collinwood was built. Moving on to the people who work on the property, you have Elizabeth's secretary, Daphne, Willie, the drunken handyman, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Johnson. But most importantly, the one that's most important to the story is Maggie Evans. Maggie is from Boston, Massachusetts, and she has moved to Collinsport and taken a job at Collinwood as David Collins' governess. She teaches him his school lessons and tries to keep him out of trouble. Maggie also has a boyfriend named Jeff, who lives in Collinsport. He is a local and struggling artist with a small studio in town. Elizabeth was responsible for hiring Maggie as her nephew's governess, but Roger, David's father, isn't too happy about the situation. He doesn't think that Maggie is capable of handling his wild son. In several scenes that were cut in the beginning of the movie, David and Maggie have a fight about David's homework, and David swears to have his revenge against Maggie. Later, Maggie ponders if she's actually having any positive effect on David, especially since his father, Roger, doesn't seem to think so. Jeff feels that Maggie needs to keep her job at Collinwood because if she quits, that means that she'll have to move back to Boston. Jeff is hopeful that his career as an artist will take off and he and Maggie can get married. Carolyn seems to feel that Maggie's more than just an employee of the family, that she has become one of them, and she feels that Maggie's positive influence will have an effect on her cousin David. Carolyn also feels that her Uncle Roger's negative attitude towards Maggie will blow over eventually, but Maggie's not sure if she wants to still continue on at Collinwood as David's governess. Later in the evening, Maggie goes to search for David. She goes to her room and finds a note in David's handwriting stating, "It's all your fault. You'll be sorry." Realizing that David might be hiding outside from her, Maggie goes to her bedroom closet to grab her jacket. As she opens the door, she is startled by the sight of David hanging from a rope in her closet. She screams and runs out of the room, searching for help. Maggie hysterically yells that David is dead, David is dead. Elizabeth's secretary Daphne, as well as the boy's father Roger and his Aunt Elizabeth, go rushing into Maggie's room to see what's wrong. She tells them that David has hung himself in her closet. When they look through the closet door to check, they see that there is nothing there. Realizing that this must be another one of David's tricks, Elizabeth is shocked that her nephew would pull such a prank on Maggie. Maggie is shocked to think that David would sink to this level to get revenge against her. The boy's father, Roger, believes that Maggie has no control over his son and insists that his sister Elizabeth discharge her. Elizabeth tells Roger that Maggie is not to be blamed for David's actions, and insists that Roger needs to take more interest in his own son's welfare, and demands that he go out and look for David, which explains why in the beginning of the movie everyone is so frantically looking for David. As the Collins family live out their lives at Collinwood Mansion, they are unaware of the horrors that will soon follow as their handyman, Willie, searches for the hidden Collins family treasure. Welcome to the House of Dark Shadows. I hope you enjoy the movie.